Welcome back to the British Accent Podcast. I'm Emily, and I'm here with Nick. Today we're going to dive into something really fascinating, the psychology of learning English. It's not just about memorizing words or practicing grammar, it's about how your brain actually learns and adapts to a new language.
That's right, Emily. Many learners don't realize that fluency isn't only about study hours, it's also about how the brain builds new pathways. When you start learning English, your brain is literally rewiring itself. At first, it feels slow and frustrating because your brain is trying to connect new words, sounds, and grammar structures together.
And what's amazing is that the brain loves patterns. The more you hear certain phrases, the more automatic they become. For example, instead of translating word by word, your brain starts recognizing full expressions like, "How's it going?" or "I'm looking forward to it." That's when fluency starts to feel natural.
Yes, and this is why exposure matters so much. Reading a textbook isn't enough, you need real-life input, conversations, podcasts, movies. Every time you listen, your brain is training itself, even if you don't feel immediate improvement. It's like going to the gym. You don't see muscles growing instantly, but the training is happening.
Another psychological factor is memory. Your brain tends to forget quickly unless information is repeated over time. That's why spaced repetition works, reviewing words after 1 day, then 3 days, then a week. You're basically tricking your brain into thinking, "Oh, this word keeps showing up, it must be important. Let's store it long term."
And motivation plays a big role too. If you connect English learning with something you enjoy, like music, gaming, or traveling, your brain produces dopamine, the feel-good chemical. That makes studying less of a chore and more of a rewarding experience.
Exactly. That's why some learners who watch their favorite series in English or chat with friends online improve faster. They're engaging emotionally, not just academically. The psychology of learning tells us, the more positive emotions we connect to English, the stronger and faster the learning process.
Another fascinating thing about the psychology of learning English is how the brain actually rewires itself with repetition. Every time you practice listening, speaking, or even shadowing a sentence, your brain strengthens the neural connections related to that pattern. That's why consistency, even with short practice sessions, has such a powerful effect.
Exactly, Nick. I like to think of it as building a pathway in the brain. At first, it feels like you're cutting through a dense forest with no trail, and it's hard, tiring, and slow. But if you keep walking the same route every day, that path becomes clear, smooth, and easy to follow. That's what happens with English fluency. The more you walk the mental path, the stronger and clearer it becomes.
And that explains why, at the beginning, it feels so uncomfortable. Learners often mistake that discomfort as failure, but really, it's just the brain working hard to create something new. If you push through that stage, you eventually reach fluency where speaking feels natural.
That's why mindset matters so much. Instead of saying, "I'm bad at English," you can reframe it into, "My brain is still training, and every attempt is building my future fluency." That shift alone can reduce stress and keep motivation alive.
And stress, as you mentioned earlier, is an important piece. If you're too anxious while learning, your brain goes into survival mode, which blocks memory and creativity. On the other hand, when you're calm and even playful, the brain learns faster and remembers better.
Which is why fun is not just a luxury, it's a strategy. Watching a TV show you love, joking with friends in English, or singing along to songs doesn't feel like studying, but it trains your brain in ways textbooks can't.
That's so true. And I'd also add that variety matters. The brain gets bored with the same repetitive drills, so mixing reading, listening, speaking, and writing creates multiple connections. It's like learning from different angles, and the brain loves it.
And the best part is, all of this proves that fluency isn't about being talented in languages, it's about training your brain. With the right strategies and enough consistency, anyone can build fluency, step by step.
And here's something really fascinating. When you study English, you're not just memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules, you're actually reshaping your brain's wiring. There's this concept called neuroplasticity, which is basically your brain's ability to change and adapt. Every time you expose yourself to English, whether that's listening to a podcast, reading a sentence, or practicing a conversation, you're strengthening certain neural pathways. Over time, those pathways become more automatic, and that's why eventually you can speak and understand without thinking so hard.
Exactly. And this is why consistency matters so much. It's not about how smart you are, or even how much time you study in one single day. It's about repeated exposure, small but steady practice. Think of it like going to the gym. You don't get fit after one super intense workout, right? But if you go regularly, your muscles build strength. With language learning, your brain is the muscle. A little bit of English every day keeps your brain in training mode.
And something I really want our listeners to remember is that the brain actually likes patterns. When you expose yourself to repeated structures in English, like, I'm going to, or, have you ever, your brain starts predicting them automatically. That's why immersion, watching movies, listening to music, speaking with others, feels so effective. You're giving your brain constant chances to recognize and anticipate those patterns, which is how fluency is born.
Yes. And here's a tip. Don't just study English in a way that feels like work. Make it fun so your brain is more engaged. Listen to songs you enjoy, watch shows you actually like, or chat about topics you care about. The emotional connection makes your brain remember better. There's a psychological element called emotional memory, which means when you enjoy what you're doing, your brain holds onto it longer.
That's a huge point. Because sometimes learners think, if I'm not studying with a textbook for hours, I'm not really learning. But actually, your brain learns just as effectively, maybe even more effectively, when you're relaxed, happy, and curious. That's when your mind is open and flexible.
And speaking of psychology, there's another factor we should talk about: mindset. If you approach English with the thought, this is so hard, I'll never get it, your brain actually becomes less responsive. But if you approach it with, this is a challenge, but I can grow from it, your brain literally activates more learning centers. It's the difference between shutting a door and opening a door in your mind.
That's a really practical way to look at it. And another thing that I think is fascinating is the role of memory. When we first learn a word, it goes into our short-term memory. If we don't use it, it just fades away. But if we repeat it, connect it with other words, and actually apply it, it moves into long-term memory. And that's why people say, use it or lose it. It's not just a saying, it's literally how the brain works.
Yes. And you can actually make that process more fun. For example, instead of memorizing vocabulary lists, you can connect new words to personal stories, or use them in a funny sentence. The brain remembers things that are emotional, funny, or surprising much more easily than something that's just plain and boring. That's why sometimes you forget 10 random words you studied last night, but you still remember a silly TikTok in English you saw 3 months ago. Your brain prioritizes emotional connections.
Exactly, and this is where fluency really starts to build. Fluency isn't just about knowing words, it's about training your brain to access them quickly, almost automatically. The more connections you build, the faster your brain retrieves the information. And this explains why sometimes people know a lot of vocabulary, but when they try to speak, they freeze. Their brain hasn't been trained to pull those words out quickly enough.
Right? It's like having a huge library of books, but no system to find them when you need them. That's why practice is essential. The more often you practice using words in real time, the easier it becomes for your brain to retrieve them under pressure. Even practicing small things, like talking to yourself in English about what you're doing. I'm making coffee. I'm opening the fridge. I'm checking my phone, can train your brain to bring words out faster.
And another psychological factor that learners often underestimate is confidence. When you feel nervous or afraid of making mistakes, your brain actually becomes less efficient at recalling words. Stress creates a mental block. But when you relax, when you tell yourself, it's okay to be imperfect, suddenly the words come much more easily.
That's so true. I've seen students improve dramatically just by shifting their mindset from, I have to be perfect, to I just need to communicate. The brain works better under encouragement than under pressure. If you treat English as a playful challenge instead of a test, you'll notice your fluency improving faster.
So, really, training your brain for fluency is a mix of science and mindset. You need repetition to strengthen memory, emotional connections to make words stick, and positive confidence to unlock what you already know.
And when you think about it, that makes learning English not just about language, it's also about self-growth. You're literally teaching your brain to think in new ways, to adapt, and to communicate across cultures. It's an amazing transformation.
Another powerful way to train your brain is through immersion, even if you're not living in an English-speaking country. Immersion doesn't always mean moving abroad, it can be as simple as creating an English-rich environment around you. For example, you can set your phone and laptop to English, you can listen to podcasts while you're commuting, you can watch TV shows without subtitles, and you can even narrate your daily activities to yourself in English. What this does is train your brain to stop switching between languages and instead make English the default mode in certain situations.
Yes, Nick, and that's an important step in rewiring the brain. At first, it feels like a lot of effort, but over time, your brain will actually start processing English naturally. I've heard so many learners tell me, one day, I just realized I was thinking in English without trying. That moment is magical, and it's not luck, it's the result of consistent exposure and practice. And neuroscience backs this up. The brain forms stronger connections the more you repeat certain activities. So the more you live in English, the stronger those neural pathways become.
And speaking of practice, another psychological trick is to gamify your learning. The brain loves rewards, and when you turn studying into a game, like giving yourself points for learning new words, competing with a friend, or tracking streaks, you tap into your brain's dopamine system. That makes learning feel exciting instead of like a chore. Apps like Duolingo do this really well, but you can also create your own little challenges. For example, I'll describe everything I cook today in English, or I'll only listen to English music for a week.
That's such a fun idea, Nick. And what's also fascinating is how emotions play into learning. When you enjoy what you're doing, when you feel curious or motivated, your brain retains information much better. On the other hand, when you're stressed, or when you constantly criticize yourself, your brain goes into a kind of defense mode, which makes learning harder. That's why self-compassion is so important in language learning. If you make a mistake, instead of thinking, I'm so bad at this, you can reframe it as, great, now my brain has a chance to learn.
Exactly. Mistakes aren't failures, they're data for your brain. Every mistake is feedback, and your brain uses that feedback to fine-tune its understanding. If you look at mistakes as opportunities, your brain relaxes, and you learn faster.
I love that perspective. And there's one more thing, memory. Many learners struggle with remembering vocabulary, but psychology gives us some really effective tools. For example, the spaced repetition technique, reviewing words at increasing intervals, helps transfer information from short-term memory into long-term memory. And using mnemonics, like creating a funny story with a new word, makes the brain more likely to store it.
Yes, and combining that with real-life use is the key. The brain remembers words much better when you actually use them in a meaningful context instead of just memorizing them from a list. So instead of just repeating, apple, 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 try saying, I'm eating an apple right now, or, that apple looks delicious. The brain connects language with experience, and that's how fluency is built.
So, if we sum it up, learning English fluently is not just about grammar or memorization, it's about training your brain step by step. By understanding how your mind works, by practicing consistently, by creating emotional connections, and by being kind to yourself along the journey, you can rewire your brain to think and communicate naturally in English.
And you know, Emily, I think another powerful angle here is how our brains actually reward consistency. Like, when you repeat something often, even if you don't feel immediate progress, your brain is literally laying down stronger connections. It's like walking through grass. At first it's hard to see the path, but the more you walk, the clearer it becomes. That's how fluency develops.
Exactly, and I love that image. It also explains why learners sometimes feel stuck, because the brain is still carving that path. It might not look like much on the surface, but beneath, your brain is making these deep, invisible changes. That's why it's important not to give up during the quiet growth phases.
Right, and here's something fascinating. Our brains love rewards. If you tie your English practice to something enjoyable, like watching a show you love or reading a story that excites you, your brain links English with positive feelings. That makes you want to return again and again, which accelerates fluency naturally.
Yes, and that's why it's so effective to combine study with things you're passionate about. If you're a music lover, learning English through songs strengthens memory, because your brain processes rhythm and melody differently than plain text. If you love sports, following English commentary makes the learning feel effortless.
And here's the kicker, when you feel emotion, your brain remembers better. That's why the English words or phrases you learn during an emotional moment, whether it's laughter, surprise, or even frustration, stick longer than words you memorized from a boring list.
Exactly. That's why laughter, joy, and even a little bit of challenge are your allies in learning. They make the brain sit up and pay attention.
So really, training your brain for fluency isn't about forcing it, it's about working with it. Using memory, emotion, repetition, and rewards in a smart way.
And let's not forget how the brain reacts to patterns. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. That's why you can recognize a song from just a few notes, or why you can finish someone's sentence before they say it. When you expose yourself to English every day, your brain starts picking up on these patterns, grammar, word order, intonation, without you even realizing.
Yes, and that's why immersion works so well. Even if you don't understand everything, your brain is subconsciously mapping those structures. That's how kids learn their first language. They don't study grammar rules, they just hear patterns over and over until they become natural.
Exactly. And that's why learners should stop being afraid of not understanding everything. Because actually, the brain is still collecting data, still processing. Even confusion is part of learning. It signals your brain is being challenged, and challenge builds growth.
That's true, and you know what? Mistakes are another piece of this. The brain remembers mistakes more strongly than successes, because they create a little shock. If you use a wrong word and someone corrects you, your brain lights up. It's like, okay, never forget this. So mistakes are not a setback, they're a shortcut to memory.
I love that. Mistakes are a shortcut to memory. That's something every learner needs to hear. Because so many people avoid speaking out of fear of mistakes, when in reality, those mistakes are exactly what make your brain stronger.
And that ties into confidence too. Confidence isn't about speaking perfectly, it's about training your brain not to panic. If your brain is calm, you can access words faster. Stress actually blocks memory recall, which is why people forget English in exams or conversations.
Right, which means part of fluency training is also training your brain to relax. Breathing, slowing down, smiling, even using body language, it signals to your brain, I'm safe, I can focus. Then suddenly the words come easier.
So in a way, fluency is this combination, repetition to build memory, patterns to guide understanding, mistakes to strengthen recall, and calmness to unlock confidence.
Yes, and when you think about it like that, fluency stops being mysterious. It's not magic, it's neuroscience. It's just about giving your brain what it needs, consistently, patiently, and with a little bit of kindness.
And speaking of rewiring the brain, there's this amazing concept called neuroplasticity. It basically means your brain is always capable of change. So even if you've been stuck translating in your head for years, your brain can actually learn to think directly in English with enough consistent exposure.
Exactly. And that's why immersion is so powerful. When you surround yourself with English, not just in study time, but in your lifestyle, your brain begins to adapt. Think about it like moving to a new city. At first, the streets feel confusing, but after a while, your brain builds a mental map. Learning English works the same way.
Right. The repetition and familiarity create those neural maps. And something I always tell learners is that small, frequent practice sessions are more effective than one long cramming session. 10 minutes every day will build stronger brain connections than 2 hours once a week.
And it's not just about frequency, it's also about emotion. Neuroscience shows that we remember better when emotions are attached. That's why you never forget the lyrics of a song you love, or a phrase you laughed at in a movie. So if you want to remember English, tie it to experiences that make you feel something.
I love that. It makes learning less mechanical and more alive. Plus, when you enjoy the process, your brain produces dopamine, which actually strengthens memory. So having fun with English isn't just a bonus, it's scientifically smart.
Yes. And listeners, I want you to remember that fluency is not just about words, it's about training your brain to respond naturally. Every time you listen, read, speak, or even think in English, you're shaping your brain into a more fluent version of yourself.
One trick I often recommend is shadowing. That's when you listen to a sentence in English and repeat it immediately, almost like an echo. It forces your brain to keep up with the rhythm, the sounds, and the flow, and over time, your brain begins to predict the language instead of pausing to translate.
Yes, shadowing is brilliant. I sometimes do it with my favorite TV shows. I'll pick a scene, play it, and repeat the characters' lines right after them. It feels a bit silly at first, but it's amazing training for the brain. You're basically syncing your thought process with real spoken English.
And it's the same with chunking. Instead of memorizing single words, you memorize small phrases like, at the end of the day, or, as far as I know. That way, your brain isn't building sentences word by word, it's pulling out ready-made blocks. That speeds everything up and makes you sound much more natural.
Exactly. When you store language in chunks, you don't need to stop and think about grammar every time. Your brain already has the pattern. So when you're in a conversation, instead of thinking subject plus verb plus object, you just recall a phrase and say it.
And that's where listening practice becomes powerful. The more you listen, the more chunks you pick up without even realizing it. It's like music, after hearing a melody many times, you can hum it naturally. The same thing happens with English expressions.
And honestly, the key is patience. The brain needs time to adjust. People sometimes give up too quickly because they don't feel fluent yet, but in reality, their brain is already rewiring underneath. Every podcast, every book, every conversation, it's all progress, even if it doesn't feel instant.
For example, let's say you're at the supermarket and you want to ask where something is. If you're thinking in your native language, you'll pause, translate, and then try to speak. But if you've practiced chunks like, excuse me, where can I find, it just comes out naturally. No pause, no hesitation.
Yes. And the same thing happens when you're watching a film. Instead of pausing the movie to translate every word, try to focus on the situation. Your brain will connect the meaning with the visuals. Over time, you stop needing subtitles and just get it.
Right. I used to tell my students, don't chase every word, chase the message. If you understand the idea, your brain will gradually fill in the smaller details. That's how you train your ears and your thinking at the same time.
And it works in small conversations too. Imagine someone says, "How's it going?" If you've memorized the chunk, "Pretty good, thanks." How about you? You don't need to translate. You just respond immediately, smoothly, like it's automatic.
Exactly. That's how fluency feels. It's less about perfect grammar and more about having the right pieces of language ready to go when you need them.
And one trick I always recommend is self-talk. Just narrate what you're doing in English, like, I'm making coffee, or I need to send an email. It sounds simple, but it slowly rewires your brain to think in English first.
Yeah, I love that. I even tell learners to do it in short bursts. You don't need an hour, even 2 minutes while you're brushing your teeth can help. The more often you do it, the more natural it becomes.
And don't be afraid if your English is messy at first. That's completely normal. The key is speed, not perfection. Later, you can polish your grammar and vocabulary. But first, you need to train your brain to stop relying on translation.
Exactly. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. At the beginning, you wobble and maybe fall, but you're still moving forward. If you waited until you had perfect balance before riding, you'd never start.
And over time, those wobbles disappear. Your brain starts recognizing patterns automatically. Words come quicker, responses flow easier, and suddenly you realize, hey, I'm thinking in English without even trying.
That's the breakthrough moment. It doesn't happen overnight, but if you keep surrounding yourself with English, listening, speaking, even dreaming in English sometimes, it will happen.
And when it does, it feels so freeing. You stop second-guessing, you stop hesitating, and you just communicate.
Yeah, that's such a powerful point. And maybe to wrap this up, we just want to remind you that thinking in English isn't about being perfect, it's about being free. The less you translate, the more natural your conversations will feel.
Exactly. So, give yourself permission to practice a little bit every day. Talk to yourself, notice English around you, and celebrate those small wins. Over time, those little steps build up to real fluency.
Thanks so much for spending this time with us. Keep practicing, keep speaking, and keep trusting the process.
You're not just learning English, you're becoming someone who lives in English. And that's something to be proud of.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Take care, and happy learning.